Tesla started moving $760 million worth of Bitcoin, and what some anticipate is them getting ready to borrow against their Bitcoin stack with Cantor Fitzgerald. The market is pricing in a Trump victory, and the Trump trades are exploding, with gold, hard assets, and commodities ripping in anticipation of Trump being elected. In other news, Bitcoiners continue to show up in North Carolina when the government and FEMA don't. We look at whether Bitcoin or gold would be valuable in a situation like Hurricane Helene. And finally, in his best interview yet, Michael Saylor talks about MicroStrategy as being a capital gateway for institutional investors to invest into Bitcoin as an asset class. And he also refutes the infinite money glitch. It's been a crazy week. Let's get into it. What's up, everybody? This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply, helping you to understand macro and markets in a simple way. We produce content on this channel 6 days a week, and so if you haven't, subscribe. Today's our Friday episode where I try to do a recap of everything that's happened in the week. And finally, if you stick around, I go through Michael Saylor's recent interview where he talks about Bitcoin transforming from a $1 trillion asset class to a $100 trillion asset class. You're not going to want to miss it. Let's get into it. One of the greatest investors of all time, and Stanley Druckenmiller, said that he believes that markets are predicting that Trump is going to win.
Wondering what the Druckenmiller playbook is around this election cycle and what you think the most likely scenario is and how you set up for it.
Well, it's an evolving situation. If you had asked me this 12 days ago, I would have said, I don't have a clue. It's a total toss-up. I still don't have conviction who's going to win on the election. But as I said earlier, I like market indicators for the economy and for financial restrictiveness. I also like them for elections. I remember how right the market was on Ronald Reagan in 1980, despite what the pundits were saying. And I must say, in the last 12 days, the market and the inside of the market is very convinced Trump is going to win.
And it's not just Stanley Druckenmiller. Prediction markets like Polymarket are also saying that they believe that Trump is going to win in a few weeks. Markets are incredibly efficient. And in one of the greatest books of all time on this subject, Wealth, War, and Wisdom by Barton Briggs, he talks about how markets have the ability to predict future outcomes better than individuals. In the book, he talks about how Germany and Japan were predicted to lose World War II by the markets long before it was even known by the real world. And I believe if the market continues to be fairly rational and predictive, that assets like Bitcoin, energy stocks, industrials, and gold will continue to do well, like we've seen in the last few weeks. In other news, like Lonzo Ball coming back from a horrific knee injury 3 years ago in order to sink his first shot back on an NBA court, Tesla seems to be getting back into Bitcoin. We've confirmed through on-chain transactions that they've moved about $760 million worth of Bitcoin and seem to be preparing to borrow against their Bitcoin stack with Cantor Fitzgerald, potentially? Well, this seems to line up because Cantor Fitzgerald, if you remember, announced their Bitcoin-backed lending product at the Bitcoin conference in July, saying that they're able to finance up to $2 billion worth of assets in the upcoming year. So this makes sense. Tesla has been a Bitcoin bull, Elon has been a Bitcoin bull, and Howard Lutnick, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, is one of the biggest bulls on Wall Street about Bitcoin. He believes that Bitcoin is a commodity, and we agree with him.
Bitcoin is a commodity. It should be treated like gold and like oil. It's just a commodity. Other digital currencies, different. Other digital assets, different. But Bitcoin is a commodity. But why can't they understand it? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Speaking of commodities, gold hit an all-time high of $2,700 per ounce and continues to be performing fantastically well. And although we hope this isn't true, the great Martis on Twitter showed how eerily similar the chart of today in gold's price looks to the chart of gold in 2007 before the great financial crisis. I gotta give gold bugs a lot of credit. Gold is fantastic at sniffing out financial trouble and economic headwinds before they happen. But here's where gold bugs are full of crap. They say that gold will be good in times of crisis. Not so much. My mom lives in Western North Carolina, and she lost power for almost 10 days in the recent Hurricane Helene storm. And you know what wasn't valuable or would have done you zero good in that time frame? Gold. Do you want gold bars in your house for someone to come and attack you when your power's out? But you know what can't be stolen from you when the electricity goes out? Your Bitcoin, unlike gold bars. Physical attackers can't get access to geographically distributed private keys in a multi-sig. Words cannot be confiscated. If you don't know what I'm talking about, or if you feel like you wouldn't be confident in a situation where electricity and power went out in North Carolina to protect your Bitcoin holdings, then I suggest that you schedule a meeting with the team at thebitcoinway.com. Their team are self-custody, cybersecurity, and privacy experts to help you master the skills that you would need in a situation like Hurricane Helene, when the power goes out and you need to protect your assets and your financial future. Schedule a meeting with their team today at thebitcoinway.com. Speaking of North Carolina, I want to give a special shout out to Shane Hazel, the Bitcoin veterans, and all of the people who've been supporting people in Western North Carolina from the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. The Bitcoin veterans have been setting up strategic communications. They've even worked with the National Guard to help donate generators and other important resources and goods to the people in North Carolina who needed it the most. Even when the government and FEMA didn't show up, they showed up. They've even raised $115,000 for the cause. Thank you for your service in a time of crisis. Now, on to my final thoughts for the day, MicroStrategy. In a recent interview, Michael Saylor gave a deep and comprehensive look into the bowels of MicroStrategy as a Bitcoin development company and his thesis on why Bitcoin is going from a $1 trillion asset class to a $100 trillion asset class. Since they've executed their Bitcoin strategy in August of 2020, their stock has risen 1,620%. That's up more than 500% from even NVIDIA, which is crazy to think about. Their strategy is simple. Because they're an operating company that generates $75 million to $100 million in free cash flow per year, they're able to invest that cash into Bitcoin. Or because they're a publicly traded company with 30 years of an operating history, they're able to issue debt through bonds at interest rates of less than 1%. Or they're able to issue shares. When their stock is valued more richly or at a premium to their underlying asset value, they're able to issue shares to raise money to, you guessed it, buy more Bitcoin. And they continue to stack more Bitcoin as they now hold 252,000 Bitcoin, or more than 1% of the entire network. MicroStrategy is a capital gateway for institutional investors to execute a Bitcoin thesis that they otherwise couldn't do, allowing for billions of dollars of capital to flow into the industry.
MicroStrategy is really just providing a set of institutional instruments that institutional investors can use to tailor a portfolio that's long, short, hedged. They can sell the volatility, they can arbitrage the volatility, they can arbitrage any instrument against any other instrument, they can generate yield, they can buy insurance. Some of those people that are short, they'll short $1 billion of MicroStrategy and they'll buy $1 billion of Bitcoin. And so if we didn't exist, then billions and billions of dollars of capital from the traditional finance markets wouldn't be invested in Bitcoin because they can't buy or hold the underlying crypto asset. They can only buy securities or bonds or options or other instruments. So we become an institutional gateway for crypto exposure by all types of investors. You know, my real aspiration now is if you really hate Bitcoin, I want you to love us. Like, we're the perfect instrument to short because I promise you I won't sell it.
He's committed, they're committed, and they're laser focused on doing one thing and one thing only, being the best vehicle for people everywhere in the world to execute a Bitcoin thesis in financial markets. The most interesting part of the interview was when Michael Saylor refuted all the infinite money glitch talks. He says that MicroStrategy is more like a transformer or more like Standard Oil, where they take crude oil and refine it into other products downstream.
It's not a money glitch. It is a digital transformation of the capital markets. When you have a system that moves from a higher energy state, a more disordered state, to a lower energy state, lots of energy gets given off. Think of steam becoming water. Like, is it a money glitch? It's just steam becoming water and it condenses. What happens when water becomes ice? It's not a heat glitch, but heat. What happens when you add heat? The ice becomes water, the water becomes steam. So if you look at the capital markets, you've got $800–900 trillion of wealth in the capital market, and you've got this wealth. You've got people invested in all these heterogeneous assets. Why do 98% of the companies in the S&P 500 not perform? How come 1% of all the returns come from like 7 companies? What I talked about with, if you study the convertible bond market, someone issues a convertible bond, it takes them 5 years for the investors to figure out whether it worked. And then when they come up with a new convertible bond, it's a different credit proposition. It's very inefficient. right? If you think about preferred stocks, very inefficient. Junk bonds, very inefficient. Private credit, very inefficient. Fixed income, people get very low yields. What if I'm getting this yield and I'm taking all this credit risk and counterparty risk? So of the 900 trillion in capital in the global capital markets, half of it is just long-term store of value, long-term capital. That is pure capital. People with money just want to keep their money. Rich just want to stay rich. So that 450 trillion is invested in buildings that are rusting. It's invested in cars, it's invested in fleets, it's invested in things that suffer from 20th century risk factors. Credit default, war, tariff, tornado.
Tax.
Like you had a good business at Kodak and your family had all their money in Kodak, and then what happened? Or you own Xerox, and what happened? Then you own the best business in Ukraine, and then there's a war. That happened. Right? I could give you 10,000 examples of risk factors that destroy wealth. So you've got that 450 trillion on one side, and then you've got 1 trillion digital capital. It's like, well, I had a building, I get rid of all the things that make the building a problem, and I make it an invisible, immortal, indestructible, teleportable digital building.
That'd be cool.
Okay? Well, that's what Bitcoin is. So this thing that people think of as a glitch, it's not that, it's energy flowing from a steam state, from highly disordered, inefficient, bouncing into each other, into a more ordered state.
He's taking a chaotic and volatile asset in Bitcoin and stepping up energy by allowing them to get higher vol Bitcoin optionality with MicroStrategy, or even lower vol Bitcoin optionality through things like bonds. MicroStrategy is a transformer transforming chaos into something that can be used and leveraged as a strategic asset by institutional traders. I encourage you to watch the interview for yourself. He talks about how $400 to $500 trillion of capital preservation wealth is now flowing into this $1 trillion asset class that he believes in Bitcoin will become a $100 trillion asset class over time. Do you agree with that number? Have you ever thought hard and deep about Bitcoin's price and what it could be in the future? Well, I know one person that has and does it a lot and talks about it on Twitter quite often. That's Geo, the power law guy. Him and I are doing a webinar on October 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern for members of the Join Columbus community so that we can discuss his views as an astrophysicist on the physics of Bitcoin and what he believes his models are saying about Bitcoin and its price in the future. If you're interested on Bitcoin's future price potential, or have ever wondered if Bitcoin is overvalued or undervalued, well, this is the conversation for you. Sign up with the link in the show notes, or you can go to joincolumbus.com and join the free online Bitcoin digital community, and you'll get an email about the upcoming webinar. Again, October 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply, and I hope you enjoyed the What Happened This Week in Bitcoin recap. Happy stacking.